say hello. So good afternoon. My name is Evan Weiner. I have been at the Riverdale Y before. In fact, I guess I was there right before COVID-19 hit. So it's always good to see the Riverdale Y people again. And we're going to talk a little bit about baseball. We're going to be talking baseball right here. And that is me with Yogi Berra. And the year is 2006 when I took that picture, and I spoke a lot at Yogi Berra's museum over in Little Falls in New Jersey on the campus of Montclair State University. And Yogi used to come to a lot of my talks over there, most of my talks over there. And afterwards, he would pat me on the back and say, "Good job, kid. Good job, kid. You want some tuna fish afterwards?" I don't eat tuna fish, but I appreciated it anyway. And you could always find Yogi in that office there. Now, baseball in the American culture. Yogi Berra, of course, became omnipresent in the American culture in the 1950s. He was in the World Series seemingly every year. 1954, one of the few years he wasn't, because Cleveland Indians played the New York Giants that year, and that was a New York Giants championship. And in 1959, the Yankees did not make it. They were beaten out in the American League, and that was the Chicago White Sox playing the Los Angeles Dodgers, with a good many Brooklyn Dodgers on that Los Angeles team. And then the Yankees would be in the World Series until 1964, every year afterwards. And Yogi was the manager of the Yankees in 1964. So he was around a lot in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 21st century. But America and baseball go hand in hand in the culture, and that starts out way back when in the 1880s. There is a guy who wrote a poem called Casey at the Bat, and I have something in common with him. Casey was written by somebody who preferred not to give his name initially, but he did give his name, and that was Ernest Thayer. If you look at baseball in the culture, go back to 1954 before I talk about Thayer. And there's a guy by the name of Jacques Barzun. He's a French philosopher. And he wrote a series of essays, and among them about America and baseball. And he said, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of baseball had better learn, or rather America had better learn baseball. And don't go to Major League games. You don't have to go to Major League games. You could go to Sandlot games, watch kids in Little League, or you could go to high school, watch the high school games, or you could go to the company teams. A lot of company teams were all over the place in those days, semi-pro teams or minor league baseball, because that was America. That was America, the melting pot and everything else in America. So whoever wanted to know baseball or wanted to know America.
I think Vicky just got on.
Yes, she did.
I could just say hello. I'm sorry I'm late. How are
Hi,
you?
Vicky.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm going to get you a recording of this too. So.
No problem. But
Okay.
I can't stay. I can't stay. Okay.
Anyway, that is Casey. Casey at the Bat, written by an anonymous guy. Guy was Ernest Thayer. Thayer wrote op-ed pieces for the San Francisco Examiner between 1886 and 1888. I wrote pieces for the Examiner, San Francisco Examiner, back in the day, in 2001. So Ernest Thayer and I have something in common. We both wrote for the San Francisco Examiner. Anyway, I don't think Thayer was too proud of this. As a matter of fact, it was printed on June 3rd, 1888. Didn't have any author's credit. He just let it go. Of course, we don't know very much about Casey. We know that he was a lousy baseball player. He struck out with the game on the line in Mudville. But where was Mudville and who was Casey? Well, we never knew who Casey was. It might have been King Kong Kelly, who was a prolific home run hitter in New England in those days. Prolific, meaning he hit 4 or 5 a year. Or it might have been some guy from Stockton, California, a little backwater town in California back in those days. Who knows? We don't know, and Thayer never told us who it was. When I was in 4th grade, PS 151, Woodside, Queens, I'm in 4th grade. And I have Miss Alexander as a teacher. Miss Alexander was your typical spinster teacher from the 1920s. She was in her 60s, although when you're 9 years old, you think she's about 132 years old. And she had the blue hair. Remember the blue hair? And she had the white blouse and the blue skirt and the tissue up here in case her nose ran, so she could go just like that. And she gave us an assignment: analyze Casey at the Bat. Analyze the poem. They don't do that very much anymore. In fact, I've given this talk many times over the years. And I have had teachers there, and I asked English teachers, I've asked them if they've done Casey at the Bat, and they don't do it anymore. But in New York City in the 60s, they did. And Miss Alexander gives us the assignment. What does this all mean? What does this poem mean? Well, I'm 9 years old, 1965 when I read it, and I said, he's a lousy baseball player. That's all. Can't be any good. He's a lousy baseball. Oh, no. It wasn't about that at all. It wasn't about that at all. It's about man's failures. That man made plan to go ahead and do whatever he has to do, and he's going to succeed, and yet he fails. The mighty Casey had struck out. There's no joy in Mudville today, for the mighty Casey had struck out. He didn't win the game. Thayer would eventually claim ownership to this, and it would take him 7 years. He was at a Harvard class reunion in 1895 where he recited the poem. He didn't think very much of it. He just printed it without author's credit. It was anonymous in the San Francisco Examiner. By the time he read the poem for the Harvard class reunion, Casey at the Bat was part of the American culture. And it was because of this guy, the old actress, Heather Hopper, who became the gossip columnist. Heather Hopper's father was DeWolf Hopper, and he was an actor. And he somehow got a hold of the newspaper, the San Francisco Examiner. Remember, San Francisco wasn't a very big town in 1888, but it was a gold mining town, and people went through there. There was money there, and they were kind of an East Coast city stuck out on the West Coast, even in 1888. So he gets a hold of this poem and decides, I am going to go on stage, and I am going to perform this. He memorizes the poem, and by the middle of August 14th, 1888, DeWolf Hopper performs this for the first time ever, Casey at the Bat. He would do it at least 9,999 more times. He did it more than 10,000 times. He did it on the vaudeville stage. He did it on the burlesque stage. He did it on other stages. He did it for records. He did it for silent movies. He acted out the part of Casey in the silent movie. DeWolf Hopper made it acceptable for Ernest Thayer to claim ownership of his poem. He put it on record, but he wasn't the first guy to put it on record. Take a look at this cylinder. This is at the Springfield Library in Springfield, New Jersey. And in Springfield, there was a hermit who lived in the town. He was by himself, and he collected a lot of stuff, an awful lot of stuff over the years, including that thing. When he passed away, people went up to the apartment and said, wow, look at this stuff behind me in the display case there. There's a lot of stuff. And this is the Springfield, New Jersey Library, and there's a special room where you give talks. And it also doubles as a kind of a Springfield, New Jersey museum. And that thing that I'm pointing to, the Regina Sublina, is a cylinder. It's a set that you could hear recorded sound on that big cylinder. This thing still works. This thing was played for me by the library director, Mrs. Spindale, and it's a John Philip Sousa march that's on that record or on that cylinder. I bring that up because that's from the mid-1890s. And if you wanted a rendition of Casey at the Bat in your home and you had one of those, you could get it because of this guy. His name is Russell Hunting, and he was an actor, and he played around with sound. He was an early sound recordist, and he records Casey at the Bat twice, 1893, 1898. Both times he used a very heavy Irish brogue, and why not? Casey was, he was assumed to be Irish, and it could have been King Kong Kelly. So Russell Hunting records this thing. In 1905, an actor by the name of John Kaiser went over to Menlo Park in New Jersey and recorded it for Thomas Edison. Hopper's version would come out in 1906. RCA Victor, well, it was only Victor at that point. The Radio Corporation of America hadn't started yet, but you might remember the advertisement was the dog looking at a cylinder, sound cylinder, his master's voice. The dog was looking at something like that. This is Segway, Quebec. This is last summer in Quebec, or last winter, no, last fall, October of 2019. And there was a guy who opened up his garage and you walked past it, and it was kind of one of the kind of museums I would love to go through, a junk museum, except it was all in his garage. So you got one of those recordings from, say, Kaiser, or you got one from Hopper. You put it right on there, you crank up the old Victrola, and it plays. And if you had one of those in your home, you could hear two different versions of Casey at the Bat from two different actors. But there you go, with the old Victrola. Hopper would be the first to commit the verse to film. He did that in 1922. It was a short subject film by Lee DeForest that was a silent movie, along with Wallace Beery, another silent movie starred in a 1927 film version of the poem. The comic Jerry Colonna, and you gotta go back in your memory 75 years or more to remember when Jerry Colonna was Bob Hope's second banana. Where's your Huda? Jerry Colonna recorded a rendition for Disney, which later became the basis of a 1946 Walt Disney cartoon, Casey at the Bat. Jackie Gleason performed it on his television show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, and others voiced the poem. Bench, the Hall of Fame catcher with the Cincinnati Reds. Tug McGraw, the left-handed relief pitcher with the Mets in Philadelphia in the 1970s and 1980s. A couple other guys did the poem as well. George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin. They did it in an orchestral setting in Tampa. They were raising money for the Tampa Police Benevolent Association. Now you look at that sign, and that sign may not mean a lot to you anymore because there's no baseball at the Polo Grounds. Because there is no Polo Grounds. Oh yeah, the staircase from the Polo Grounds still exists, and the home plate is marked in the housing project that was built up in Upper Manhattan around 155th Street and 8th Avenue. But there was a songwriter by the name of Jack Norworth, and he is on the subway, and he's looking up, and he's looking up, and he notices the signs around the subway. It's a good thing that he went when he did in 1908, because if he did in the last 30 years, he'd seen nothing but Dr. Zinmore's ads to get rid of your zits. But he's looking at the sign, and he's looking at the sign, and he had never been to a baseball game. And he looks at it, and he says, ball game today at the Polo Grounds. It's on the subway. The end of the subway would be 155th Street and 8th Avenue, depending on what line you were on. And he goes and sees his friend, another songwriter by the name of Albert von Tilzer. And they decide that they're going to write a song together about baseball. It's a song written in 1908 that is still played regularly today, or in most seasons when there's no COVID-19 virus. And it was revived in the 1980s as a ballpark staple by that guy, Harry Carey, the late Harry Carey, who I worked with in 1994-95, the voice of the Chicago Cubs. And in between the top of the 7th inning and the bottom of the 7th inning, he would sing the song, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game, Take Me Out to the Crowd," and he would sing it rather poorly. To this day, when there are fans in games in Chicago, to this day, somebody sings the national anthem in between the top of the 7th and the bottom of the 7th inning, and there's one catch. You have to sing it poorly. You cannot sing it well. My wife sung national anthems at Madison Square Garden, along with Shea Stadium, the New Jersey Meadowlands, before sports events. She would have a problem singing it poorly. Me, on the other hand, I would be perfect. I could sing it poorly. But Harry Carey made sure that if you sung the sung poorly, it was good. At least it was pretty good for Harry Carey. getting back to Take Me Out to the Ball Game, Take Me Out to the Crowd. Norwood and Von Tilzer never saw a baseball game, never saw a baseball game in their lives. The song would become famous on the vaudeville stage. Now, what is this song about? Well, Katie Casey is the one who sings the song. Take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Katie Casey had the baseball bug. She had the baseball fever, and she had it bad, really bad. That was kind of unusual for a woman in 1908. Von Tilzer comes up with the idea, Norwood comes up with the music. Women did not go to baseball games in 1908. And if they did, they weren't looked upon as high-class women. Baseball players were ruffians, and they were looked down upon as, the dregs of society at that point. Women weren't supposed to go to baseball games, but she wants to go to a baseball game. And she is either on a date with a friend, a boyfriend, or she is with a friend, or she is with somebody else who is a male. And they get presumably on the subway, because that's where the song emanates from. And 3 o'clock was game time all the time, so you have plenty of time to get to what would be the Polo Grounds. Somewhere in Brooklyn, you could go to a game, and the New York Yankees, New York Highlanders at that point were playing at the highest point of Manhattan, in the north of Manhattan, around 178th Street at an old ballpark. So she's telling her boyfriend, or whoever it is, we don't know who it is exactly, but we think it's the boyfriend, saying, hey, I want to go to a baseball game. They're trying to figure out what to do on a date. And the guy, no, I don't want to. I want to go to a baseball game. No, I don't want to. No, I want to go. You got to understand, I want to go to this baseball game. And all of a sudden she screams out, take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if we ever get back. For we will root for the home team. They don't win. It's a shame. It's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Okay. We don't know if she ever went to the ball game with the guy, but we do know a few things about Katie Casey. She knew all the players. They didn't wear numbers. They didn't wear their names on their backs in those days, but she knew all the players, and she knew how to get them aroused. I don't know if it's aroused in the song or if it's aroused in the Bull Durham movie type setting, but she knew how to get all the players going. Well, the song would become famous on the vaudeville stage right after it was written, because Norwood's wife was Nora Bayes. And Nora Bayes was a popular singer back in those days, 1908, 1909. She popularized the song along with Shine On Harvest Moon. Now, last year there was an op-ed piece in the Washington Post, and a woman suggested that whether Von Tilzer and Norwood knew it or not, or planned it out or not, that this might have been the first song written from the suffragette viewpoint, that women had rights and they were going to speak up for their rights. And Katie Casey was speaking up for her rights. Her right, this is what she wanted to do. Now, a couple things about women back in 1908. The women didn't have the right to vote. In 1910, the women suffragettes went to the White House and met with William Howard Taft. That was April 14th, 1910. It's opening day for the 1910 baseball season. There was a convention of women in Washington at that point, and some of them were able to go to the Oval Office and meet with President William Howard Taft. He wasn't too interested in giving women the right to vote, and he's getting increasingly angry with the women who are there, because they're pounding on him. We want to vote, we want to vote, we want to vote. He slips a note out to one of his aides, get me out of here, take me out to the ball game. Literally, take me out to the ball game. See what you could do. I want to go see the Washington Nationals first game, opening day of the 1910 season in the American League. The aide comes back, you're all set, let's go, Mr. President. Mr. President does go. He leaves the women behind. He can't deal with it. He needs to lift his spirits. He ends up going to the Washington Nationals baseball game. He throws out the presidential first pitch. First time the first pitch was thrown out by a president, and he invents the seventh inning stretch. He was a big man. He weighed over 300 pounds. The seats were 19 inches across as opposed to 23 inches across. Today, he got up to stretch. Everybody got up because the president got up. They thought he was leaving. Everybody took off their caps and showed the president a sign of respect. But he sat right back down for the bottom of the seventh inning. And that's where the seventh inning stretch allegedly started in Washington, all because of those women suffragettes giving William Howard Taft a bad time. Take Me Out to the Ball Game was first played in the Major League Baseball park in 1934 at the World Series in Detroit, with the St. Louis Cardinals playing the hometown Tigers. In 1936, Take Me Out to the Ball Game is featured in the Marx Brothers movie Night at the Opera. I'll give you a very, very quick thumbnail story to get to this. Groucho is hired by Margaret Dumont to be the manager of the opera company that Margaret Dumont is the main patron of. And they're going to Italy to find the world's greatest tenor. Of course, along the way, Groucho meets up with Chico and Harpo, and they have a friend who is, in their mind, the world's greatest tenor. He's Alan Jones, Jack Jones, the singer, his father, who took Zeppo Marx place in the four Marx Brothers, which became three, but he played the Zeppo role. Anyway, so Alan Jones, his character, along with Harpo and Chico, stowaway on a boat. And you might remember Night at the Opera in the scene, the scene where the waiter opens the door and everybody falls out of this room because he's delivering food. They do get back to New York. They do get to the opera. They knock out the guy who's Margaret Dumont's tenor, get the other tenor out there to perform. But they need to kill some time. So how they kill some time? Well, Chico and Harpo get sheet music, hand out all this sheet music to the orchestra, the musicians in the pit, and it's Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And Groucho drops down, peanuts, Cracker Jacks, peanuts, Cracker Jacks, all Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Major piece in this film, Night at the Opera. Harpo Marx would return to the song on the I Love Lucy show in 1955, and it would be featured in numerous movies and television shows. And of course, it is still played to this day, virtually every day from February to November at various baseball parks, and it's sung in Little League games. And Take Me Out to the Ball Game is the most famous song written in 1908 globally. They even have versions of it in Japan and also the Caribbean countries and wherever else they play baseball, including Australia and New Zealand. Now, a couple of years ago, I was up to the Berkshires, and we were at North Adams, or in North Adams, Massachusetts. Went to an art museum in North Adams. Across the street from the art museums is a little baseball museum. Jack Chesborough, who won 41 games for the New York Yankees or the New York Highlanders in 1904, comes from that area. And there's a little baseball museum about him and about Jeff Reardon, who played Major League Baseball in the 70s and 80s. And there was a little newspaper article, reprinted, of course, and it talked about baseball being played in Berkshires in 1792 or so. And baseball derived from a game called Rounders. The comedy of Abbott and Costello in the Who's on First routine was a common vaudevillian burlesque style of comedy in the 19-teens and 1920s. It was called Rounders. So ironically enough, baseball, which comes out of Rounders, and maybe the most famous comedy duo routine of all time, Who's on First, comes out of Rounders as well. Rounders. And so maybe there's some irony in that baseball was not invented by Abner Doubleday in 1839. Abner Doubleday was a student at West Point in 1839 and was nowhere near Cooperstown. But there was something called the Mills Commission, around the turn of the 19th and 20th century, and they were looking for the origins of baseball, and they found this drunk in Denver by the name of Abner Graves, who remembers Abner Doubleday as a 5-year-old laying out a baseball field in Cooperstown. That didn't happen. The game does come from a form of rounders. So does this routine. Rounders is pretty simple. You have the smart aleck, here played by Bud Abbott, and you have the stooge played by Lou Costello. By the way, the straight man always got 60% of the take, with the stooge getting 40%. It wasn't 50-50 because it was very hard to find a good straight man. In this particular rounders, round, around, and that's why it's called rounders, because it goes round in circles until it ends. Bud Abbott, he's the guy. He is the guy who is answering questions of Lou Costello. And Costello is asking dumb question after dumb question, except they're not really dumb questions. Like Costello would say, well, do you have a first baseman? And he'd say, sure. He said, well, what's his name? Who? That's who I'm asking, who? And they go round and round and round and round until he said, do you have a second baseman? Yeah, what? So it would never end. Of course, they would go from 1 minute to 10 minutes just in circles, which is why it was called rounders. And they get the routine around 1936. It's an American classic comedy duo who's on first a very common style of vaudeville or burlesque, B-U-R-L-E-S-Q-U-E, burlesque with a Q-U-E. It's a family show. Burlesque, B-U-R-L-E-S-K, K at the end, meant the women took their clothes off. Sally Rand fan dance. Do you remember Sally Rand from the 1930s? She was in a cartoon. That's the only reason I know Sally Rand. She was in Betty Boop, Popeye cartoon. And I looked her up. Anyway, so it was a common vaudeville style back in those days. And there's always been this question, did Abbott and Costello pay Mike Musto, who supposedly wrote this thing, $15 for the routine? I have a couple of comic friends. One of them, John Joseph, whose mentor was Alan King. You might remember Alan King. He was on the Ed Sullivan Show a lot. Reason why, he lived in Jackson Heights. If somebody didn't show up, he'd just hop on the 7 train and he'd be right at the studio doing whatever he needed to do for Ed Sullivan. Anyway, John Joseph said, of course, Abbott and Costello paid $15 for the routine. I have another comic friend, Max Stocelli, who said, hey, we're comics, we steal everything. Jerry Lewis stole a lot of his act. He was up in the Catskills as a kid, long time, was able to watch a lot of the acts, memorize the acts, and basically did it better than anybody else. Abbott and Costello did it better than Mike Musto. There are other people who claim that they also wrote the act. Was it a baseball burlesque routine? Well, yeah, I guess it was in a way. It's been suggested that Abbott, while he was on the burlesque QUE circuit, did a version of the routine before meeting Costello on the burlesque QUE version circuit. Abbott never said he did it, never said he didn't do it, but there is apparently some proof that Abbott did some form of baseball rounders routine. Abbott and Costello premiered the routine on the Kate Smith radio show. That was in March 1938. And they probably got some help from John Grant, who was Costello's writer until he wasn't in the 1950s, because Costello suspected him of being a communist during the Red Scare and fired him, and then realized that he didn't have any material and he hired them back, communist or not, and Will Glickman. So they are on, in March of 1938, they had become players on the Kate Smith show. They do this routine, and the rest is history. They performed it at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt, for Harry Truman, for Dwight Eisenhower, performed it in the movies, on radio, on TV, and they were enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in 1956. First ever non-baseball people ever to get honored in baseball's Hall of Fame. Vin Scully was the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer. He started in Brooklyn in 1950 and moved with the team to Los Angeles in 1957. And here we are, this is about 58 years after Vin Scully starts his career with the Los Angeles Dodgers. And he's looking at his TV monitor because he is simulcasting the baseball game. First 2 innings on both the radio and TV, and then Charlie Steiner took over for him on radio, and he stayed on TV. And Scully looks down at his monitor and says, now we know the answer to the eternal question of who's on first. Ladies and gentlemen, who is on first? That is a South Korean player the Dodgers had about 10, 12, 14 years ago by the name of Who. And he's standing on first base. Who's on first? There was a Watt. What's on second? He played with the Washington Senators before this routine became famous in the 1920s. But I can guarantee you this totally. There was not a third baseman by the name of I don't give a darn. Abbott Costello could do this routine in a minute, could do it in 10 minutes. They did it more than 10,000 times, and they never did it the same way twice. Now, a few years ago, I went up to Hyde Park to talk to Franklin Roosevelt. It was a nice September day. In fact, it was about 3 years ago this time. It was a really gorgeous September day, and Franklin was a gracious host along with Eleanor. They even had books for us. They were a little stiff, but that's okay. You know, Franklin hasn't been doing all that much of anything since 1945, and Eleanor hasn't been doing much of anything since the 1960s, but they were gracious hosts. Now, one of the reasons I needed to talk to Franklin Roosevelt was I give talks. That's what I do. I give talks. And in giving talks, I give 3 different talks, one of which I have done at the Riverdale Y, which was the 1936 Olympics with Marty Glickman, Sam Stoller not running the Berlin Olympics. I wanted to know why Roosevelt didn't send or allow the American team and didn't stop the American team from competing in the Berlin Olympics in 1936 and legitimize the Hitler regime. Another talk, which I think I've given at the Riverdale Y, is the early days of TV. Franklin Roosevelt was the first person on American commercial TV that was outside of an experimental station. That's Franklin Roosevelt on April 30th, 1939 at the New York World's Fair. And then the other thing is this talk, baseball. I wanted to know why Franklin Roosevelt told the commissioner of baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, after the December 7th, 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor, why, just why, was it okay to play baseball? And I got my answer. There is Kennesaw Mountain Landis on another baseball talk. He's a guy who ends up being somebody who has a questionable past or questionable reign as commissioner. Yeah, he cleaned up the game from betting, but he was a segregationist that did not allow African-American players to participate, although I'm not sure if the owners would have overridden him if he said that African-American players could play baseball. But he writes a letter to Roosevelt after the Pearl Harbor December 7th bombing by the Japanese. In it, he talks about how baseball curtailed the 1918 season, not because of the Spanish flu, but because of World War I. And they curtailed it by a month. There were players who signed up to go into World War I. The Boston Red Sox of the American League played the Chicago Cubs of the National League. The American League owners did not want to play the World Series. They just wanted to cut off the season around September 1st. The National League and the Cubs insisted on playing the World Series, which was a good thing for the Red Sox because behind the left arm of Babe Ruth, the pitcher, who won 88 games in his career, by the way, the Red Sox would beat the Cubs. Roosevelt answers Landis this way. I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 hours or 2.5. Roosevelt's been dead since 1945, so he hasn't watched Yankee Red Sox games, which could run 4.5 hours, and which can be got for very little cost. Roosevelt could afford the box seats at Yankee Stadium. His family could. Most people can't today. And very little cost is all relative because very few baseball games cost very little today. But back then, it was a different time, 1942. And incidentally, I hope that night games could be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. In the western part of the Eastern time zone, place like Detroit, you've got gets dark, 9:15 at night. He could start the game at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, and it'd be done before darkness would set in. So this is called the green light letter. Lets baseball play, and it also lets other sports play. I once spoke to Dan Rooney, who is the president of the National Football League's Pittsburgh Steelers, and he said with that letter, we felt as the NFL, we could play the 1942 season. The National Hockey League kept playing, even though they were losing a lot of players. Canada had entered the war, World War II in 1939. Most of the players were Canadian, and teams like the New York Americans didn't have enough players to field a team or to ice a team because most of the players came from Canada. The New York Americans never came back after the war. That's another story. But Rooney said that he felt, his father felt, Art Rooney, we could play. Everybody else felt we could play, and that was because of the green light letters. Babe Ruth was in 10 movies overall, basically playing himself in all the movies. He played Babe Ruth. He was in the 1920 silent film called Heading Home. That was the picture of a young Babe Ruth who had just gotten to the New York Yankees. He was a baseball star. He starred in Babe Comes Home, 1927 silent movie. There is no print that has survived. The way the movies were made back in those days with the chemicals used, unless you really preserve the clip, they would eventually disintegrate, or the movie. He also appeared in the Harold Lloyd silent movie in 1928 called Speedy. He plays himself again. He's signing autographs for a bunch of kids, and he sees a cab driver, which happens to be Harold Lloyd, who was a famous comic silent movie star in the 1920s. And he calls him over and take me to Yankee Stadium. And because it was a silent movie, they had to put up what he was saying to Harold Lloyd, who was a terrible cab driver. Probably would fit in today, but he was a terrible cab driver in 1928 on his way to Yankee Stadium. Ruth overall was in 10 movies. The first one, Hitting Home, the last one, Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig story in 1940. But the first real star from baseball who made it into vaudeville, stage, and film was a New York Giants player by the name of Mike Donlin, also known as the baseball matinee idol of Manhattan, or the baseball idol of Manhattan. He was a pretty good player, hit .333 during his time in the dead ball era, took multiple breaks from the game to perform on stage and in vaudeville. He retired in 1914, went right into the movies, and so did his manager, John J. McGrory, who was in the same movie. Again, a baseball movie, right off the bat. It is said that Donlin made at least 53 appearances on film. 53 times he was on film, and not many of those films have survived. Now, Lou Gehrig was in the movie. It was a 1938 movie called Rawhide, and it's a terrible movie. It is an awful movie, but for medical purposes, it's a great movie, and I'll tell you why. Lou Gehrig didn't know that he had ALS until 1939, when he's diagnosed in the spring of 1939. And he's losing feeling in his hands, or losing strength in his hands and his legs, and when he goes to see the doctor. But in this particular film, he's still relatively healthy. And the doctors are able to look at the film and look at all of his movements in the film. And they have a timeline between when he made the film in April of 1939 to see how far and how quickly the disease had progressed. Now, that's the good thing about the film, because it gave some insight to ALS. Not that it was going to help Lou Gehrig or others who suffered and are still suffering from ALS. My former agent, Tanya Bickley, passed away from ALS in 2013. The movie is pretty simple. It's a Western called Rawhide. It opens with Gehrig announcing that he's done with baseball. He's finished. He can't deal with it anymore. He's at Grand Central Terminal. He's catching a train west. He's going out to Montana, where he and his sister buy a ranch, and they could relax in solitude. Now, you got to remember, Lou Gehrig was married at this time, so that's how far-fetched this film is. You also have to remember a couple things. Lou Gehrig was born in New York City, went to high school in New York City, went to Columbia University in New York City, played baseball for the Yankees in the Bronx, and was a New York City guy. That's all he was, although he lived with his wife, Eleanor, over in New Rochelle, and there's a street called Lou Gehrig Way over in New Rochelle. So this is such a far-fetched movie. He's leaving. He's going out to Montana. He's going to live with his sister. He's going to live out the rest of his life, and he can relax in solitude. The movie doesn't go anywhere, but it has a useful purpose because of medical research. Babe Ruth also had a useful purpose for medicine. He smoked. He had throat cancer, and he was diagnosed with a cancer of a special cancer of the throat. And he's one of the first people in the United States that ever got chemotherapy. Helped him a little bit, then he went downhill. But it's kind of strange that Ruth and Gehrig, number 3 and number 4 in the Yankee lineup, both would, through illness, add to medical research. I learned everything in life from Warner Brothers cartoons. Well, maybe not everything, but about 98% of the things I know in life I got from those cartoons. The greatest animated comedian of all time is Bugs Bunny. No ifs, no ands, no buts. He was a brilliant comedian, absolutely brilliant comedian. And he's sitting out there in the outfield, and he's in this little rabbit hole, and he's watching the Gas House Gorillas over there, and they're beating the teetotalers. And Bugs starts yelling, as any good heckler would, I'll murder you bums with one arm behind my back. Well, the Gas House Gorillas take him up on his offer. And Bugs Bunny is playing the Gas House Gorillas. And he would eventually beat the Gas House Gorillas. Bugs Bunny, baseball player, that at the absolute height of his popularity in the 1940s. Actually, Bugs celebrated a birthday earlier this summer. Bugs is 80 years old. That was in July 27th, 1940, the real Bugs Bunny. That looking Bugs Bunny makes his debut, and I am all the happy for the fact that I was able to watch Bugs Bunny cartoons on Channel 5 when I was a kid and learned all about life from Bugs Bunny. Some of the movies, that is Rosie O'Donnell hugging Madonna. Gina Davis has the chest protector in that picture, and this is the movie called League of Their Own. And I'm going to tell you a little story about League of Their Own because I knew the technical advisor to this. He was Casey Candell. He played second base with the Montreal Expos in the 1990s, and his mother played for one of the teams in the Women's Professional League. That Phil Wrigley, the guy who, the chewing gum guy, Juicy Fruit, Double Mint, Spearmint, he put the money up for the league for the girls to play what would be for them Major League Baseball. The league lasted only about 9 years, but Casey told me that he was involved in the project because his mother wanted him to get it 100% absolutely correct. It's a movie that Tom Hanks is in. Tom Hanks plays a character based on Jimmy Fox, the great slugger who played in the American League in the 1920s and 30s. And he's managing one of the teams. And Tom Hanks is the Jimmy Fox character, says, there's no crying in baseball. It's one of the movies in baseball. The Lou Gehrig story, prior to the Yankees, the luckiest man on earth, Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper was right-handed and was from Montana. He did all of his shots because he was right-handed, and mimicking Gehrig, who is a left-hander, he did all of his shots with a mirror on the other side. So they filmed the mirror when he was doing baseball stuff. That's Kevin Costner. That is Tim Robbins, Nuke LaLoosh, and Costner, Crash Davis, Bull Durham. Bull Durham came out in the late 1980s. It's based, at least the Nuke character is based on a guy named Steve Dalkowski, who passed away earlier this year. Ron Shelton wrote the movie, who's a minor league player with the Baltimore Orioles, and Dalkowski was on the team. Dalkowski could throw a baseball more than 100 miles an hour. He could strike you out, he could walk you, or he could hit you. He also had off-the-field problems, alcohol problems, and only made it to spring training with the Baltimore Orioles. Fastest guy, allegedly, who ever threw a baseball. Crash Davis is an old-time catcher. His job is to make sure that the guy with the million-dollar arm and 10-cent head, had his head screwed on correctly so he could get to the major leagues. Davis is spending the summer with Susan Sarandon, the baseball Annie, but she also breaks in all the good rookies as well. That's all part of the movie. Max Patkin was in this movie, the Clown Prince of Baseball, who I saw right after the movie was released. To say Max, who went around minor league baseball doing comedic routines based on baseball. I said, hey, Max, how was your movie? And he said, it was great, except I didn't get the girl, Susan Sarandon. Max, one of his acts on the field, you might have seen on the old Show of Shows with Sid Caesar, was the fountains routine, where he fills his mouth up with water and just blows out water, and it looks like a cascading fountain. Max Patkin was in this movie, Bull Durham. Jerry Lewis, Los Angeles Dodgers are in Los Angeles for the second year, and Jerry Lewis decides to tap into the Dodgers and the Geisha Boy and use some of their players for the movie. And this begins Hollywood's love affair with the Los Angeles Dodgers. There is Robert Redford in the 1980s. He's playing a character. The book is called The Natural. The movie is called The Natural. That's done at the Rock Pile up in Buffalo War Memorial Stadium. Robert Redford in the movie The Natural. Costner again, Field of Dreams. Here talking to Joe Jackson. They come out of the cornfields in Iowa, and if you build it, they'll come. Major League Baseball was supposed to play a game in the Iowa cornfield this year, 30th anniversary of the movie or so. And that was knocked out by COVID-19. They're hoping to play a game in the cornfield next year. And there's Joe Jackson, who was thrown out of baseball in 1920 for allegedly throwing the 1919 World Series with 7 other Chicago White Sox players. That is Brad Pitt, and he is playing Billy Beane. Billy Beane, the smartest guy in baseball. All you have to do is ask him. And he's also was a really good-looking guy when he was drafted by the Mets as an 18-year-old in 1980. Turned down a scholarship to Stanford University to become a baseball lifer. Very, very smart guy. All you have to do is ask him. He'll tell you that. And this is a scene from Moneyball, the Michael Lewis book that was turned into a movie about analytics and how analytics through Billy Beane was applied to baseball, and that made the Oakland A's a better baseball team. Better baseball through analytics. Walter Matthau. Walter Matthau was the coach of the Bad News Bears. The Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bail Bonds back in the 1970s. The movie Major League, there were 2 movies, Major League. The Cleveland Indians attempting to win the World Series. Charlie Sheen is wearing number 99 there. Charlie Sheen is one of the stars of that movie. That is me in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania a couple of years ago, and it was getting cold in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the middle of October. And that is all that remains of Forbes Field, which was the first concrete stadium ever built in the United States for the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team. And what remains is the outfield wall and some of the ivy on the wall, which is probably not the original ivy. It is in the middle of the University of Pittsburgh. And the reason I bring that up is that another baseball film was shot there, Angels in the Outfield, back in the early 1950s. And Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, who did all the road movies together, decided to get into Major League Baseball. Bill Vex sold a small chunk of the Cleveland Indians to Bob Hope in 1946. Hope, who was born in England but grew up in Cleveland, was a fan of the team and jumped at a chance to have a small share of his hometown team. Meanwhile, Bing Crosby the same year invested in the Pittsburgh Pirates and became a minority owner, and that is how Angels in the Outfield began its life in Pittsburgh. So some of the movies: Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield, done in Pittsburgh at the behest of Bing Crosby, who is a minority owner of the Pirates. Fields of Dreams, The Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, Moneyball. Those are all movies that baseball themed. Hope and Crosby were not the only comedians, entertainers, singers to ever own the baseball team. Danny Kaminsky, whose father was my mother-in-law's dentist in the Bronx back in the 1920s and 1930s. Danny Kaye was part owner of the expansion Seattle Mariners in 1977. And Danny did some comedy bits based on the Los Angeles Dodgers. Phil Foster did a song based on the Brooklyn Dodgers. Phil Foster, them bums. Homer Simpson scores the winning run in the 1992 City Championship game between Monty Burns' Springfield Nuclear Power Plant and former Major League Baseball players, all in cartoon form. And there is Monty Burns, and there is Smithers with the championship trophy. Sandy Koufax is signing an autograph. I'm not sure if he's doing it for Mr. Ed or Wilbur Ellen Young. Sandy Koufax was on the Mr. Ed show when Mr. Ed tried out for the Los Angeles Dodgers. He didn't make it. Herman Munster also tried out for the Los Angeles Dodgers as part of the Munster series. There is Leo DeRocher, who was the third base coach of the Los Angeles Dodgers at that time, who never met a morning that he liked. He was a night owl, and the only time he would wake up in the morning was if there was an afternoon game. If you were the manager of the Chicago Cubs, the way he was in the 1960s, well, you had to wake up because they played nothing but day baseball at Wrigley Field, and you had to get to Wrigley Field by 11 o'clock in the morning for a 2 o'clock game. Anyway, because they had no lights in Wrigley Field. Anyway, Leo is walking by a park, and he hears the bat. He hears the crack of the bat. And he goes into the park to see what's going on, and there is 7'4", 560-pound Herman Munster hitting lazy fly balls that are going forever to his son, Edward Wolfgang Munster, or Eddie Munster. And right away, the third base coach of the Los Angeles Dodgers happens to be walking with a contract in his pocket, pulls it out, signs him, and Herman goes off to try out for the Los Angeles Dodgers. It doesn't work out. Herman is too big. He is injuring players as he's lumbering around the bases. And he goes back to home. Fast forward a couple of months. It's fall. Herman's out there with his son, Eddie. And he's kicking footballs to Eddie. And Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch comes out of that same area of the woods that Leo had popped out of months earlier, and decides he's going to offer a contract, because he's a general manager of the National Football League's Los Angeles Rams, to Herman. And Leo comes running out. Remember, Leo didn't like the day. No, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Herman Munster, the Munsters, trying out for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Gilligan's Island. Oh, Gilligan's Island. Those are two guys who were with the Los Angeles Dodgers. The guy on the left is Jim Frenchie Lefevre. The guy on the right, Al Ferrara, who was an outfielder with the Dodgers. He came from Brooklyn, and he said that he knew he made it to the major leagues the first time he saw his face on a baseball card. Al Ferrara. Jim Lefevre appeared in a couple other shows, ended up being a baseball lifer as a manager. I was talking to him about, what were you doing there? He said, well, you know, we're headhunters and we're looking to get Gilligan's head. I said, you know, you and so many others were on Gilligan's Island, never told the authorities that there were 7 castaways stranded on Gilligan's Island. He said, why do that? Ruin the show? Lose a paycheck. Something to that as well. So there is Gilligan's Island, which is still seen around the world. Only 3 years at Gilligan's Island. That was it, 3 years of it. But it's still seen around the world. That's Johnny Roseboro, and he looks like he's on Dragnet. And he was on Dragnet, the Los Angeles Dodgers catcher, Dragnet 1968, that picture. The Dodger owner, Walter O'Malley, appeared with the star of TV's Rifleman, Chuck Connors, who happened to be a former Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman. He was on the show Branded that Connors was starring in 1965. The Los Angeles Dodgers center fielder Willie Davis acted in The Love Machine. Jerry Lewis, Which Way to the Front. The Flying Nun. Roseboro, Johnny Roseboro was in Dragnet 1968. Dragnet's some of my favorite shows because the acting is just so bad on those shows. Burke's Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, Experiment in Terror. When I'm live with people, especially if I have a lot of men who love baseball, I ask, who's that guy on the left? I'm going to spare you that story and save 5 minutes for you. That's Phil Silver, star of the 1950s Phil Silver Show, which was also known as You'll Never Get Rich or the Sergeant Bilko Show, depending on syndication. The guy on the right is Steve Bilko. He was a great minor league player in the Pacific Coast League for the Los Angeles Angels. Nat Hiken was the guy who wrote The Phil Silvers Show. He also did Car 54, Where Are You?, which was a tremendous show and was a show about the Bronx in the 1960s, the changing character of the Bronx in the 1960s, and you couldn't duplicate that show today, even if you tried to, even with his original scripts. It was so Bronx. It's so ethnically Bronx at that point. Anyway, Nat Hiken saw Steve Bilko play baseball in Los Angeles and said, that's the guy for me. That is my Bilko. And the character Ernie Bilko was named after Steve Bilko, which brings me up to Yogi Berra, because I once asked Yogi, I said, Yogi, you were on the Bilko show, right? He said, yeah. I said, the show took place in Kansas, Fort Baxter in Kansas. So I said to Yogi, what are the New York Yankees, what are all you players doing in the middle of Kansas? No, we're not in Kansas. Said, well, you were in Kansas on the show. No, we're in the Bronx. I said, yeah, I know you were in the Bronx. He said, no, we're in the Bronx. I said, yeah, but what were you doing in Kansas? It's the Yankee players. He said, no, we drove over the George Washington Bridge, a couple exits, made a left, and the studio was right there. At that point, I gave up. Yogi was 100% right. The show was shot in the Bronx, right off the Cross Bronx Expressway. So Donna Reed Show, Don Drysdale's on the Donna Reed Show, Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, the Munsters, Phil Silvers Show, also known as Bilko, some of the shows that baseball players were on in the 1960s, baseball in the culture. The king of schlock shows, Aaron Spelling, used the Baseball Encyclopedia to name his TV characters. And he comes across the name Stubing, Moose Stubing of the Bronx, born in the Bronx in 1932. Moose Stubing. And he likes the name Stubing, so he names the lead character of The Love Boat. Aaron Spelling did Charlie's Angels, did Fantasy Island, did Dynasty, did The Love Boat, all these shows. So he names the captain, Merrill Stubing, after Moose Stubing, who was with the El Paso team for most of his career in minor league baseball. And here's, I don't know, is this life imitating art or art imitating life? You choose. John Forsythe landed his first paying job as the public relations ballpark announcer at Ebbets Field for the Dodgers in 1950. He was the voice of the Los Angeles, or rather the Brooklyn Dodgers in Ebbets Field in the 1950s. He would go on to star in one of Spelling's hits, Dynasty. He was Blake Carrington in that in the 1980s. And there is Moose Stubing. Captain Stubing was named after him on the Love Boat. And there is John Forsythe, who goes full circle. He is with the Los Angeles Dodgers Hollywood Stars. The Hollywood Stars would play a game every year prior to a Dodger game, and he being the voice of Charlie's Angels and then being in Dynasty, Aaron Spelling shows. Full circle for him. He's back with the Dodgers, and he is with Jack Lemmon in that picture when the Los Angeles Dodgers used to host Celebrity Night. And there's Mr. Baseball, Bob Uecker. Now, if you got to the seat and you sat next to Johnny, you made it. You actually made it as a comedian. The story of Bob Uecker. He's a second string catcher with the Milwaukee Braves in the 1960s. He moves with the team to Atlanta in 1966. He's traded to St. Louis, then to Philadelphia, retires, gets a job with the Atlanta Braves in community relations. He is also bouncing around the Southeast as a comic. He's trying to make it as a comic. He's in Atlanta one night, and in walks in Al Hirt, the trumpet player. Al Hirt was the first guy to do the national anthem at the Super Bowl, playing the trumpet. Anyway, Bob Uecker is performing that night, and Al Hirt thinks he's the greatest thing going. He calls Johnny Carson shortly thereafter. He says, you got to get this guy on. You got to get this guy on. You got to get this guy on. Johnny says, okay, we'll bring him on. And Uecker does his routine. He kills them. Johnny invites him to the couch. And Johnny looks at him, and in the break, they're in a commercial break, and he says, is it true you play baseball? And Uecker said, it must be, because I have one of these, a baseball card. Uecker would be on Johnny's show an awful lot over the years. I got to know him as the Milwaukee Brewers announcer, and he would go on to be in the Miller Lite beer commercials and was one of the stars of Mr. Belvedere, which was a show that was on ABC for about 6 years in the mid-1980s. He played a sports writer, and there was a butler in the show called Belvedere. And he did a pretty good job for a number of years as one of the stars of that show. Broadway, damn Yankees, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. And little guy, Lola wants you. That was one of 2 songs in the show. It was a big hit. It was about the Yankees winning all the time and Washington losing all the time. Washington first in war, first in peace, last in the American League. That's not quite true because they did win the World Series in 1933, and this is 1954. So, damn Yankees, Joe Hardy sells his soul so Washington can win. The other song, You Gotta Have Heart. And You Gotta Have Heart, as sung by the New York Mets in October of 1969 after the amazing Mets won the World Series. Oh, I'm sorry to do that. I didn't mean to do that on the camera, even though Ed used to do it. Now, you probably don't know this, and there's no reason you should, but Jerry Stiller was a cousin of mine. Stiller and Mirror on the show an awful lot, over 3 dozen times. And Jerry and I, a couple of times, spoke about Sullivan, and Ed Sullivan started his career as a sports writer for the New York Daily News in the 1920s. You're going back 100 years or so. And the New York Daily News used to sponsor a amateur boxing tournament called the Golden Gloves. And Ed Sullivan was told to go down to Madison Square Garden and be the ring announcer. And the ring announcer, the microphone comes down from the ceiling. You hold the microphone like that, and you would say, in this corner is so-and-so, in that corner is so-and-so. Voila! He didn't know what to do as the host of a TV show, so what you saw there was a ring announcer, according to Jerry Stiller. This is the New York Mets. They win the World Series. Art Shamsky in the double-breasted 6-button suit, who is still around. I occasionally talk to him. He's in the front row. Next to him is Rocky Ron Swoboda, who's still around. He's down in New Orleans. Tom Seaver just passed away a little while ago. That was shortly after Tom Seaver announced his opposition to the Vietnam War. And Tug McGraw is 3 to the right of Tom Seaver. He used to name his pitches. His curveball was called the Bo Derek because it had a little tail on it. And his fastball, the Peggy Lee, because why? Is that all there is? Is that all there is? Remember the song, Is That All There Is? But Jerry Stiller and Ann Mirror used to be on the show an awful lot. And they have a theater named after them over at the Hebrew Home, not too far from the Riverdale Y. And that brings me to the perfect segue, Jerry Seinfeld and George Steinbrenner. Jerry Seinfeld and George Steinbrenner. Now, there were storylines about the New York Yankees in that show. And you know what Jerry Stiller told me one day? Well, he told me this, and also Dave Zen told me this, along with Joe Safety and Rick Cerrone, that George Steinbrenner came up with some storylines for Seinfeld. And here were the storylines suggested by George that Larry David made into scripts. Missing George, board meeting moved, different uniforms. Missing George comes right out of Tampa. American Shipbuilding, George's company in Tampa. And George employed somebody who he didn't think had the greatest intentions, nor did he have the greatest friends, but George kept him around. It's a Friday afternoon. Everybody's leaving for the weekend. He's going as well. They're all gone, except one thing. He leaves his car there. Monday morning comes. George looks and looks, sees the car, goes inside, wants to say hello. The guy's not there. And George presumes he's dead because he's got all these shady characters as friends. And he calls the Tampa police, put out an all-points bulletin looking for this guy because he assumed that he's dead. Now, in the show, similar to what happened in the show, for some reason, George Steinbrenner thinks George Costanza, played by Jason Alexander, George Costanza, who's the Yankees' assistant traveling secretary, is dead. And George Steinbrenner, played by an actor, Larry David did his voice, goes to the Frank Costanza's house in Queens. He knocks on the door. Frank Costanza, my cousin Jerry Stiller, looks at him. Yeah, what do you want? He said, we think your son George is dead. And Frank Costanza looks at him. yeah, no, we think your son is dead. And Frank Costanza looks at George Steinbrenner and says, you traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps. You traded Ken Buhner for Ken Phelps. They would find George on the show, and this guy who worked at American Ship, they would find that he came to work, and he just left his car there. He went away with somebody else, but it became a Seinfeld story. Board meeting move, that's pretty simple. If you knew George Steinbrenner, and I did know George Steinbrenner from about 1982 until the late 1990s. If you knew anything about George, your food was his food too. And there's a board meeting at Yankee Stadium. Somebody comes in with a calzone, and George said, "Where'd you get it?" They said where he got it, around Yankee Stadium. The whole board meeting moved to that restaurant. They did that on the show. Different uniforms. George tried some polyester type uniforms with the Yankees minor league team in Tampa. They shrunk. It became a George Steinbrenner, Larry David script. George actually did have a scene on Seinfeld. Didn't work. If you go up to YouTube, you can look at it. It doesn't work. He thinks he's an actor. They didn't want an actor. They wanted a buffoon. They wanted George. They didn't get him. So it doesn't work. He is not in the Seinfeld episode, as Jerry Seinfeld was explaining. He actually did a scene in the show. It was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. He wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. Steinbrenner would also be a guest host on Saturday Night Live. He lampooned himself rather. George Steinbrenner, catcher, first base, second base, all around the place. Coach, manager, general manager, owner. George Steinbrenner was in skits making fun of himself. Saturday Night Live also did, in the late 1970s, Garrett Morris played a Hispanic baseball player, Chico Escuela. And they had a Chico Escuela night down in St. Petersburg before a Mets-Yankees preseason game. So Saturday Night Live used not only Steinbrenner, but also the Mets for one of their comedy skits. Seinfeld also had Keith Hernandez on the show after his career. Keith had no idea who Seinfeld was. The episode, Jason Alexander, who played George, is jealous of Keith Hernandez because he gets Jerry's attention all of a sudden. And that's also in that show, there's a reenactment of a spitball a reenactment of the Kennedy assassination using a spitball with Roger McDowell in Philadelphia. Hernandez said that when his agent Scott Boras, who is still agenting these days in 2020, asked him if he wanted to be on Seinfeld, he said, "What's that?" He says, "Well, they fly you out first class. You're in a nice hotel for a week. Here's 15 grand. Keith said, "Show me the way." And they did become friends. And Jerry has been on Mets games with Keith. And now there's going to be a new owner of the New York Mets shortly. So see what Seinfeld has to say about that. Now, I was going to take this out. I decided I was going to take this out. Who hears of Wally Pipp anymore? I'm going to take it out. But I watched the season opener of Jeopardy on Monday night. And there was a question, the $600 or $1,200 question. I forgot which it was, in first round or second round. And they brought up Wally Pipp. The answer, he replaced Wally Pipp as the first baseman of the New York Yankees. Who is Lou Gehrig? And I'm going to say, 95 years. 95 years. Who remembers Wally Pipp? I do when I was a kid because I heard the old expression, "You got Wally Pipp," which meant you lost your job because you called in sick and somebody else did the job better. Wally Pipp, the myth, he lost his job to Lou Gehrig June 2nd, 1925, because of a headache. Moral of the story, don't call in sick because someone else will do your job and they may do it better. Wally Pipp ended up playing with the Detroit Tigers and then minor league baseball with the Newark Bears and made more money in Newark than he did with the Yankees. June 2nd, 1925, 95 years ago. And it's a Jeopardy question. So there you go. Old Gold cigarettes and baseball. Bull Durham, of course, was a cigarette. Old Gold cigarettes. Babe Ruth in the blindfold test. It looks like he's about ready to go into Old Sparky and ready to be electrocuted for something in that little picture with the blindfold over his eyes. Old Gold's mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. Now the coffin of carload. Always buy Chesterfield. Chesterfield was the New York Giants sponsor and baseball sponsor. As you can see, Bucky Harris, New York Yankees manager, Bob Elliott, who was with the Boston Braves, Ted Williams of the Boston Red Sox, Stan Musial of the Cardinals, Joe DiMaggio, who I guarantee you did not pay for that cigarette, Ewell Blackwell of the Cincinnati Reds. Always buy Chesterfield, always milder, better tasting, cooler smoking. When you change to Chesterfield, the first thing you will notice is their mildness. Tobacco and beer. Baseball sponsors for a long, long time. Now, Joe Garagiola grew up with Yogi Berra. They knew each other from the time they were 2 years old up at Dago Hill in St. Louis. I know I'm not being politically correct, but neither were they. They said they were from Dago Hill. And Joe Garagiola told me about Yogi, that Yogi knew how to step in it. Step in it. He was successful. Yogi, Yoo-hoo. There's Yogi, Mickey Mantle, probably drank stuff stronger than Yoo-hoo. Moose Skowron, the Washington first baseman in 1964, Yogi's old teammate, really, really nice guy. Love talking to Moose. Great stories. Ellie Howard, Elston Howard. Now, my opinion of Yoo-hoo doesn't really matter. I thought it tasted like chocolate added to water. I didn't particularly like it. But there were people who liked it, like Yogi. Yogi meets the Oliveri family. They're in New Jersey. Country Club, 1955 at a party. Yogi is there, and they can't get it into supermarkets. And they say to Yogi, hey, what do you think of our drink? Yogi said, I like it. He's on board. He's there on board, and he is fully on board with it. Dave Kaplan, who ran the Yogi Berra Museum for a long time, told me this story. Once I was in the office and the phone rang. No one else was around. I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. Yogi said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Yogi sold Italian dressing, craft Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything. Sure makes swell salads. Sold a battery. I had cars that needed water in the battery. I remember putting water in the battery in 1966. Capri station wagon, one of my cars back in 1972. Yogi Berra says I add water only 3 times a year. Prestolite high-level battery needs water only 3 times a year. See your local Prestolite dealer today. Yogi sold beer, remember, tobacco and cigarettes and beer, baseball staples. He was selling Miller Lite beer along with Bob Uecker and marvelous Marv Thornberry of the 1962 Mets. I don't know why I'm here. Yogi also sold bicycles. Yogi Berra, slugging New York Yankee catcher, says this Christmas ask Mom and Dad for Shelby, the winner's bike. I like Shelby because it's the slickest, streamlined bike on the road. And there is Joe D, Joltin' Joe, Stork Club. He didn't pay for the cigarette. He didn't pay for the drink. He didn't pay for the dinner. Guarantee you that. There's Joe D in Maryland. I have had a friend by the name of Marv Schneider who worked for the Associated Press. Co-wrote a book with a guy by the name of Morris Engelberger. Morris and Joe were best buddies, and the book was called Joe and Me. And Marv said that there was 11 pages about Joe and Marilyn together. And for about 3 years before he got sick, Marv would go out and give talks on Joe and Marilyn based on 11 pages of a book that he wrote with Morris Engelberger. They were the couple. They were the couple of couples in the entertainment field. January 14th, 1954, Joe and Marilyn elope in San Francisco. October 1954, Marilyn files for divorce, citing mental cruelty. And some of it had to do with this. That's 26-foot Marilyn, Stamford, Connecticut. It's the scene from 7 Year Itch where the skirt blows up. Now, if you went to church back there, you walked out of the front gates, you would see Marilyn's underwear. And if you walked out, there's a church to my left and Marilyn's left in this picture. it was another church, and you would see her side, the halter top that she's wearing, and part of the skirt uplifting. Somebody had a sense of humor in Stanford, and they weren't the churchgoers because they were the ones who were complaining. Anyway, apparently DiMaggio was on the set that the day that the skirt blow up took place, and apparently there was some action in the household that night. You know, Joe had some simple requests of his wife. He wanted her to be a stay-at-home mom. He wanted dinner at 5 or 6 o'clock when he was home. He wanted somebody who didn't make more money than he did, and he didn't want somebody who was more famous than he was. I guess he struck out 4 times. Considering Joe hardly struck out in his career, he really struck out with Marilyn Monroe. Songs of baseball, Mrs. Robinson or Mrs. Roosevelt. That's how that started out. We didn't start the fire of Billy Joe, Joltin' Joe. That's Hey, Hey, Joe DiMaggio back in the 1940s. Duke Ellington, did you see Jackie hit that ball in the 1950 song Mickey by Teresa Brewer? You probably have heard this song 15, 20,000 times in your life. Mrs. Robinson, Simon and Garfunkel. That was part of an album of old friends and bookends back in about 1968. Mike Nichols was the producer, or actually was the director and writer of The Graduate. And Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel became friends with him. And they contributed a little snatch of a song to the movie. People started telling Paul Simon, you know, if you flush that thing out, you might have a big hit on your hand. And he flushed it out, played it for Mike Nichols, of Nichols and May, among other things, and Mrs. Rob and The Graduate. And he says, you got a hit on your hands, except you got to change the name. It's no longer Mrs. Roosevelt, as in Eleanor Roosevelt. It's Mrs. Robinson. Well, over the years, I've heard stories about Joe DiMaggio meeting Paul Simon for dinner from other New York Yankee players. And apparently, Joe walks in and meets Paul Simon, introduces himself, and the first thing he says, what do you mean? Where have I gone? I'm here. I'm with you. I'm eating dinner with you. You know, I did a Bowery commercial. I'm doing Mr. Coffee commercials. I haven't gone anywhere. I'm here. And Paul Simon says to him, well, you know, yeah, I was looking for a hero. I was looking for somebody who was a hero. And besides, you left my life when you were 10 years old. When I was 10 years old, 1951, you retired. I never saw you again. I never saw you again. And so where have you gone? You were my hero. They have dinner, and that's the end of that. He accepted the explanation, and Paul probably paid for dinner because Joe had short arms and long pockets. He's officially interviewed, he being Paul Simon, on the Dick Cavett Show. And he said, I didn't mean the lines literally, that I thought of him as an American hero, and genuine heroes were in short supply. He accepted the explanation and he thanked me. We shook hands and said goodnight. Dick Cavett also had one other question. And Mickey Mantle had the same question when he saw Paul Simon. Why'd you use him instead of me? Paul Simon told the Mickey Mantle does not sound as good as Joe DiMaggio in that song. Mickey accepted it, didn't like it because he didn't like DiMaggio. DiMaggio didn't like Mickey because DiMaggio would look to his left during the 1951 season and see a beautiful man with blonde hair, chiseled. His name was Mantle. That was from the earth. He's the next great Yankee star. Joe is 37 with a bad heel and on his way out. 1951 World Series is a fly ball hit to right center field. Mickey is running like the wind because he could run like the wind in those days. He trips over a sprinkler, gets injured, tears up his knee. Mickey never forgave Joe because he felt that Joe loafed on the ball. And for the rest of their lives together, they hated one another. Oh, they looked happy together occasionally when they had to take pictures together for baseball purposes, but they hated one another. Cavett was asked why Mantle's name wasn't used. Why it was DiMaggio? And Paul Simon said, it's about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are. Terry Cashman and I share the same periodontists down the road from the Y in Riverdale. Terry Cashman was baseball's balladeer in the 1980s. He was Jim Croce's producer. He's actually working on an anthology of Jim Croce's work. The singer who was killed in a plane crash around 1974. He was Jim Croce's producer. But in the 1970s and 1980s, the former minor league baseball pitcher turned his eye to baseball again. And he wrote a song called Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, Talking Baseball, Terry Cashman. Talking Baseball, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke is a 1981 song written and performed by Cashman. Joe DiMaggio was in that photograph that you just saw, but it was airbrushed out of the picture sleeve because he's not mentioned in the song, which probably was better for everybody. That is the Scooter Phil Rizzuto, only baseball player that I could figure out that's in the Baseball Hall of Fame and has a gold record. The gold record for Paradise by the Dashboard Light, the Meatloaf song. Used to see Meatloaf in Westchester. His daughter played softball. He was the coach of the team, and I'd see him down at Yankee Stadium or the football game. He's a former college football player. And we're talking about Paradise by the Dashboard Light, which is part of the album Bat Out of Hell, which was supposed to be a Broadway play, but never materialized. But the album did. And they wanted Rizzuto on the album because they wanted Phil Rizzuto. They wanted the wit and wisdom of Phil Rizzuto, although Rizzuto never realized that he had wit and wisdom. The song Paradise by the Dashboard Light is a 1978 song. Rizzuto does do the play-by-play. It took about 100 takes before he became the guy that they wanted on radio, as opposed to the thespian that he thought he was. They recorded up in Boston. And the player is aggressive. The player was a teenage boy who basically wanted to slide home and score with his girlfriend in the car. The player has an aggressive base running style, gets called out nearly at second base and third base, and would try for home on the suicide squeeze, and he'd make it. Now, that's in the song. Scooter claims he never knew the song was about sex until his kids, who were going to school, university, college in Boston, a couple of them, told him, "Hey, Dad, that song's about sex." Huckleberry, he lied to me. But this is the same guy who's doing play-by-play with Bill White, and they're talking about some pitcher. And the pitcher, and Bill White says to the pitcher, "You know, he's got good rhythm out there." And Phil says, "You know, me and Cora being his wife, me and Cora, we use the rhythm method." Baseball cards. Baseball cards. 1964. I'm 8 years old. I have baseball cards. I have baseball cards, right? There's baseball cards. And I have a teacher by the name of Mrs. Charles. I'm in third grade. And she takes my baseball cards away. She takes everybody's baseball cards away. And I'm in Roseland, New Jersey about 12 years ago doing this talk. Topps baseball cards. 5 cards, 5 cents. Stick of bubble gum. Every dentist, every oral surgeon, every periodontist loved Cyberger for inventing the baseball card with the gum, because it was like biting into a floor, biting into the gum, and that gum ruined your teeth. But anyway, make a long story short, 5 cents with bubble gum. So I'm telling the story about how Mrs. Charles took my cards. And there's a woman, this is a senior residence, she's sitting to my left and she's slinking into her chair. And I look at her, I said, "You're not Mrs. Charles, are you?" She looks at me. "I had to do it." "Huh? I had to do it." "Do what?" "You took my cards away." "You don't understand. You don't understand." I said, "No, I don't understand. Tell me." She said, "I was dating a guy. He had a 6-year-old boy, a 6-year-old boy. And I wanted to get him to like me. And what I did, I felt baseball cards. He liked me with baseball cards. So you stole my baseball cards to give to this kid because you were going out with somebody and you wanted him to like you, and you stole my cards, 5 cents, 5 cards, stick of bubble gum, and you did that?" "I had to." "You had to?" So what happened? He broke up with me. He left scars on me. I was scarred for life, baseball cards. But the baseball cards were our internet in a way, because it told you all about the baseball player. And if you really wanted to, you went to the back of the baseball card and you took a piece of paper, and what a guy did in the game, it taught you how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide if you wanted up-to-date statistics. And if you want to know anything about geography, like where Oakland was, you would go and look at an atlas, or you'd spin a globe. Maybe they'd have the city on there. It also was the entree into gambling. Most people don't realize this, but it was, because for boys, we learned how to gamble by flipping cards, throwing cards, leaners, and all that other stuff, or making strategic trades. Baseball cards. And they also made great bicycle flaps. You put a clothespin into the bicycle. You had the card sticking out that way, and it made this whirling sound, great whirling sound. Baseball today, no new songs really. No new literatures, no Old Man in the Sea anymore by Ernest Hemingway. Mentioned the great DiMaggio, which brings me to another Yogi story. Dave Kaplan tells me the story that in the 1950s, Ernest Hemingway comes through the Yankee clubhouse. He's meeting each Yankee one by one. Ernest Hemingway, meet Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, meet Ernest Hemingway. Yogi says, how you doing, Ernie? What paper you write for? Could have been the Kansas City Star. He would have been correct. Ernest Hemingway meeting Yogi Berra. Really not too many new movies or blockbuster movies. Moneyball probably the last one. Just another sport. Yes, Homer Simpson is in baseball's Hall of Fame. And there is Homer Simpson with Marge and Maggie and Bart and Lisa in the Hall of Fame. Along with the John Fogerty song from 1985, Center Field. The movie League of Their Own, and of course, Who's on First with Abbott and Costello. The NFL football surpasses baseball by 1965 as the most popular sport in the United States. And there is Joe Namath talking to me. I had hair in those days in 1988. My buddy Bruce Morton, who plans to be at one of my talks, I think tomorrow night. And behind him is Weeb Ewbank, who is the coach of the New York Jets. And this is talking the 20th anniversary of the New York Jets winning the Super Bowl, 1968 season. By 1965, football surpassed baseball as the most popular sport. And Joe Namath and the New York Jets winning the Super Bowl made the Super Bowl a national holiday. The Super Bowl becomes a holiday because of Joe. 1950, it was baseball, horse racing, and boxing that dominated American sports. By 1965, football surpassed baseball. There is Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is with me in 1985. Muhammad Ali could not save boxing. By this point, 1985, 60,000 punches to the head, along with Parkinson's disease. Ali, you couldn't really speak to. Horse racing, that's Gulfstream in Hollandale, Florida. Most horse racing is hanging on because of casinos and racetracks like that one at Gulfstream. That is Jim Bouton. Jim Bouton wrote, in my opinion, the quintessential baseball book, Ball 4, which came out 50 years ago, humanized baseball players. We learned that Mickey Mantle learned how to drink. Jim and I had a relationship for a number of years. Only time we were together ever speaking was at Yogi Berra's museum, and we didn't even speak together. He spoke at the seminar before me, but we got to talk there, and that's my only picture of Jim and I together, speaking together at the Yogi Berra Museum in 2007. According to the New York Public Library, one of the 20 most influential books of the 20th century, used as part of the arbitration when Peter Seitz ended baseball's reserve clause. Soccer. There are more soccer fields near where the Mets play in Flushing Meadow than there are baseball fields at Flushing Meadow Park. I was in a movie called The Sons of Ben, all about soccer. This is Philadelphia, and I'm on the red carpet, The Sons of Ben movie 2015. And we will leave you with this, because it ain't over until it's over. Just like if you see a fork in the road, take it. Or nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. We are coming up to October, World Series time. It gets late early out there, talking about the shadows in left field at Yankee Stadium. And Yogi has been quoted before the Supreme Court of the United States more than anybody else. It ain't over until it's over. Well, if you're waiting for a great story, you're not going to get one. Mike Dyer, a sports writer, now living in Sarasota, Florida, was with the Long Island Press in 1973. And Mike Dyer got Yogi Berra to say it ain't over until it's over. Oh, before I go, one other Yogiism. Carmen, his wife, says to Yogi, hey, you know, Tim, their son Tim went to go see Dr. Zhivago today. And Yogi said, what's wrong with him now? Mike Dyer. New York Mets are not having a good season in 1973. A lot of their players were injured. Jerry Grody, Tom Seaver, a whole bunch of others. But they're hanging in the National League East. They're hanging in there. Not great, but they're hanging in there. And anyway, to make a long story short, time is running out. It's September. The Mets are still mathematically within striking distance of winning the pennant, National League East. It's a game at Shea Stadium, and the Mets lose a game that they can ill afford to lose if they want to win the pennant. And after the game, there's Yogi at his desk, and all of the media, the newspaper guys surround Yogi, and Mike Dyer says to Yogi, Yogi, is it over yet? Yogi said, it ain't over till it's over. It's over. I want to thank you so much. Thank you, Vicki, for inviting me. We will see you again on October 27th. We'll be doing stuff from 1964, including talking about the New York World's Fair, the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, the Beatles meeting Cassius Clay, and Vietnam, among other things, and also the riots in Harlem and other places. Thank you so much, Vicki, for inviting me, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks.